In 2015, a country of 5.5 million people received 32,000 asylum seekers in a single year. That's not Germany. That's not France. That's not Sweden with its 163,000 arrivals that same year. That's Finland, a country where, the year before, only 3,600 people had even applied for asylum. In 12 months, the number went up tenfold. And then, something completely different happened. Finland didn't just react. It didn't just tighten up and move on. What Finland did over the next decade became one of the most deliberate, most complicated, and most revealing immigration experiments in modern Europe. And almost nobody outside Scandinavia is talking about it. To understand what happened in Finland, you have to understand what Finland was before it happened. For most of its history, Finland was a country people left, not one people came to. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, hundreds of thousands of Finns emigrated, mostly to Sweden, in search of jobs and opportunity. In 1990, only 1.3% of Finland's population was born abroad. That number today is closer to 8%. The change happened fast, and it started with a shock. In 1990 and 1991, Finland received its first significant wave of asylum seekers, mostly Somalis fleeing civil war. The arrivals numbered in the thousands. The Finnish press called it the Somali shock. Not because thousands of people was actually that many, it wasn't, but because Finland had simply never processed the experience of mass immigration before. The institutions weren't ready. The cultural frameworks weren't there. Finland adapted. The integration apparatus was built from scratch through the 1990s and 2000s. Policies were written, reception centers were opened, language programs were created. And for the next 2 decades, numbers stayed manageable, typically somewhere between 1,500 and 6,000 asylum applications per year. The system worked, roughly. Not perfectly. Employment rates for Somali-origin adults remained stubbornly low, well below the Finnish average, and integration challenges were real and documented. But the scale was manageable. Then 2015 happened. By the summer of 2015, Europe was in the middle of what it called a refugee crisis. Over 1 million people crossed into EU territory that year. Germany took 890,000, Sweden took 163,000, and Finland, quiet, small, relatively insulated, took 32,000. The Finnish Prime Minister, Juha Sipilä, went to a reception center in September 2015 and urged Finns to help. He offered to open his own home to refugees. His tone was warm. His language was solidarity. 6 weeks later, his government published an action plan on asylum policy. Its opening line stated that Finland's objective was to stop, quote, the uncontrolled flow of asylum seekers. That shift from open my home to stop the flow in 6 weeks tells you something important about how fast the political ground moved. What changed? The numbers themselves. Reception centers were overwhelmed. Municipalities that had never housed a single asylum seeker were suddenly asked to host hundreds. Finland's comparatively generous benefit system, built for a different kind of immigration, wasn't designed for this pace. The recognition rate for asylum claims also told a complicated story. Many of the arrivals, particularly from Iraq, which was the largest source country, didn't ultimately qualify for protection under Finnish law. Thousands of cases were rejected. Deportations became a political flashpoint. And beneath all of it, something deeper was shifting in Finnish politics. In April 2023, Finland held a general election. The Finns Party, a nationalist, anti-immigration party, came in second with 20.1% of the vote, their best result ever. The result forced a coalition. Prime Minister Petteri Orpo's center-right National Coalition Party formed a government with the Finns Party and handed them control of 7 of 19 ministries, including the Interior Ministry. The Finns Party leader, Riikka Purra, stood at a press conference in June 2023 and said, she called what followed a paradigm shift. And then they delivered one. The government cut the annual refugee quota from 1,050 to 500. It raised the bar for work-based immigration and introduced language proficiency requirements. It tightened citizenship rules. It reduced benefits available during integration periods and introduced financial penalties for asylum seekers who missed integration appointments. The language around immigration in official government documents changed too. Where previous governments used words like integration and inclusion, the 2023 coalition used phrases like carrying capacity. The idea that Finland had a finite ability to absorb people, and that capacity had limits. It was a fundamental reframing, and the numbers reflected it almost immediately. Then something happened that nobody in Helsinki had fully prepared for, even though, in hindsight, the pattern was familiar. In the fall of 2023, just months after Finland formally joined NATO, asylum seekers began appearing at Finland's eastern border with Russia. Dozens, then hundreds, mostly from the Middle East and Africa, traveling through Russian territory and showing up at remote Finnish border crossings without documentation. Finland's interior minister called it what it was. This wasn't a refugee crisis. This was a geopolitical operation. Russia had done the same thing before. Belarus had used migrants as a pressure tactic against Poland and Lithuania in 2021. Now Moscow was using it against a newly minted NATO member. Finland's response was swift and without compromise. In November 2023, it began closing border crossings. By April 2024, the entire 1,340-kilometer land border with Russia was shut. The EU President Ursula von der Leyen visited the border to stand alongside Finland in what she called a defense against Russian hybrid attacks. This changed the immigration debate in Finland permanently. It added a national security dimension that made restrictive policy not just politically popular, but strategically necessary. In Helsinki's framing, migration was now simultaneously a humanitarian issue, an integration challenge, and a tool of warfare. That's a very different problem than any European country had been designed to manage. Here's where Finland's story becomes genuinely uncomfortable, because it has two completely contradictory facts sitting right next to each other. Fact 1. Finland's government is restricting immigration, cutting quotas, tightening rules, and calling for stricter borders. Fact 2. Finland desperately needs immigrants. Finland's birth rate has fallen below 50,000 per year for 4 years running. The working-age population is contracting. By 2050, projections suggest that for every retiree, there will be fewer than 2 working-age people supporting them. That ratio, sustained over decades, breaks pension systems. A 2023 report by Finland's ETLA Research Institute said Finland would need to triple net immigration to address low birth rates and an aging population. The government's own Talent Boost program is actively recruiting skilled workers from India, Brazil, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Healthcare alone, stretched thin by an aging population demanding more care while the workforce of caregivers shrinks, faces a shortfall of tens of thousands of workers. So what is Finland actually doing? It is running 2 policies simultaneously, and they contradict each other. On one track, the government restricts humanitarian immigration, tightens asylum rules, reduces refugee quotas, and makes citizenship harder to obtain. This satisfies the Finns' party base and addresses genuine integration challenges that decades of experience have made real. On the other track, Finland is quietly expanding work-based immigration, building international recruitment pipelines, and offering streamlined permits to skilled workers, specifically because the economy will not survive without them. Whether that's a sophisticated policy response or an unresolved contradiction is the question Finland is still trying to answer. So a decade after the shock of 2015 and 2 years into the most restrictive immigration government in Finland's history, what has actually happened? Asylum applications dropped from 32,000 in 2015 to around 2,900 in 2024, and fell again to about 2,000 in 2025. The border closure worked. The policy shift worked, by the numbers the government was measuring. Deportations rose 64% in 2024. Voluntary returns rose 73%. The Finns' party's share in regional elections in April 2026, however, collapsed to 7.8%, suggesting that even in a country that voted for restriction, there are limits to how far the public wants to push it. And the demographic math, unchanged by any of these policies, keeps getting worse. Finland's population is projected to begin declining by 2034. The average age is already 44. Finland didn't solve its immigration question. What it did was confront it honestly and discover that honesty doesn't make the contradictions disappear, it just makes them clearer. A country too small to ignore immigration. A country too scarred by its 2015 experience to embrace it easily. A country whose national security now requires it to treat migration as a weapon, even while its economy requires it to treat migration as a lifeline. Finland ran one of the most complete immigration experiments in modern Europe. Open borders to a tenfold surge, a decade of integration challenges, a political hard turn to restriction, a Russian hybrid warfare operation, and a demographic clock that doesn't stop ticking. Did Finland get it right? Did it overcorrect? Or is it caught between two things that can't both be true at the same time? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to see how Germany handled the same 2015 surge and why its outcome looked completely different, that video is right here. Subscribe if you want the next one. We're covering the country that may have the most radical immigration policy in all of Europe, and the result is not what you'd expect.